The call came in at 8:42 a.m. A woman 27 years old, found unresponsive in her apartment. No signs of forced entry. No immediate answers. Just silence. When paramedics arrived, they worked quickly, but it was too late. Jasmine Cooper, young, full of life, just weeks away from becoming a mother, was gone. The ambulance rushed her to ECU Health Medical Center, where doctors made the heartbreaking announcement. Jasmine and her unborn daughter had not survived. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic medical emergency. But when the autopsy results came in, the truth was undeniable. Jasmine had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. She had been strangled. This wasn't an accident. It was murder. Within hours, the news spread through Greenville, North Carolina. Friends and family struggled to understand how a woman so close to welcoming her child could be taken so violently. And then something strange happened. Her fiancé, Kayshaun Williams, posted a message on Facebook. It was filled with grief, confusion, and a declaration that he had lost everything. "I don't even know where to start," he wrote. "What I just lost is mind-blowing. I can't think. I'm sick, my fiancé, and my baby girl Jasmine Cooper. I will never be okay. My heart is broken, man. Why do I always lose what I love when I've been doing nothing but good things in life?" At first, his words drew sympathy. A grieving man robbed of the future he had planned. But as detectives dug deeper, the cracks in his story started to show. The couple had been expecting a child, but Kayshaun had hoped for a son. When he found out they were having a girl, something changed. Jasmine's excitement for motherhood was met with distance. Their once happy relationship became tense. And just weeks before her due date, she was gone. The investigation was just beginning, and soon, all eyes would turn to the one person who had the most to lose. Jasmine Cooper was more than just a name in a tragic headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a woman who had dreams that stretched far beyond the walls of her Greenville apartment. She was born and raised in North Carolina, where family was everything to her. Her mother, Angela, often spoke about how Jasmine had always been the type to put others before herself. She had a quiet strength, a kindness that made people feel safe in her presence. As a child, Jasmine was bright and determined, always pushing herself to do better. She excelled in school, earning the respect of her teachers and classmates. But beyond academics, she had a passion for helping people. That drive led her to pursue a career in healthcare, where she worked as a medical assistant. It was a job she loved, not just because it provided stability, but because it gave her purpose. She found fulfillment in making patients feel cared for, in being the person they could trust in their most vulnerable moments. Outside of work, Jasmine was known for her warm, infectious energy. She had a way of making people laugh even on their worst days. Her best friend, Michelle, recalled how Jasmine could turn even the simplest moments into memories worth holding on to. Whether it was a late-night drive blasting music or a quiet afternoon baking cookies, Jasmine made life feel special. But nothing excited her more than the idea of becoming a mother. She had always talked about starting a family, about the kind of mother she wanted to be. When she found out she was pregnant, she was overjoyed. From the moment she saw those 2 pink lines, everything changed. She planned the nursery down to the smallest detail, picking out soft pastels and tiny outfits, imagining the life she would build with her little girl. Her excitement was contagious. Her family rallied around her, ready to support her in every way possible. But in the background, something fell off. Those closest to Jasmine noticed a shift in her relationship with Kayshaun. At first, she didn't talk about it much, brushing off concerns with a reassuring smile. But as the weeks passed, the weight of it all became harder to hide. Her mother remembered the last conversation they had. Jasmine had called, her voice steady but distant. "I just want her to be safe," she had said, referring to her unborn daughter. It was an odd statement, one that seemed out of place at the time, but looking back, it was a quiet warning, a glimpse into the fear she had been holding inside. No one could have imagined that just weeks later, Jasmine and her baby would be gone, that her dreams of motherhood would end before they even began. and that the man who once promised to love and protect her would soon be the one sitting in an interrogation room, trying to explain what went so horribly wrong. Kayshaun Williams grew up in North Carolina, just a few miles from where Jasmine was raised. He was a kind of person people either gravitated toward or avoided altogether. Some described him as charming, with a smooth way of talking that made it easy to believe whatever he said. Others, particularly those who knew him well, saw something else, an unpredictability that made them uneasy. As a child, he had moments of brilliance, excelling in subjects that interested him, but his focus was inconsistent. Teachers noted his ability to engage deeply one moment and check out completely the next. He was never one to back down from a confrontation, and while he wasn't known for outright violence, there was a pattern: heated arguments, impulsive decisions, and an underlying frustration that never seemed to go away. After high school, Kayshaun bounced between jobs, never quite settling into a career. He talked about wanting more for himself, about making it big one day, but his actions rarely matched his ambitions. Friends from his past recalled how he always seemed to be in the middle of some kind of problem: money issues, relationship troubles, and moments where his temper got the best of him. Then there was the incident. Years before he met Jasmine, Kayshaun was arrested for making a false report of mass violence on school property. It was a case that didn't make national headlines, but raised serious concerns for those who knew him. The details of what led him to do it remain unclear, but it was enough to land him in legal trouble. Some brushed it off as a bad decision, a moment of recklessness. Others saw it as something more, a glimpse into a mind that didn't always operate within reason. Despite his troubled past, Kayshaun presented himself as a devoted fiancé when he and Jasmine announced their engagement. To the outside world, he played the role of the excited father-to-be, posting about their journey and sharing updates about the pregnancy. But behind closed doors, something was shifting. Jasmine had always believed in love, in the idea that people could change. She wanted to build a life with Kayshaun, to raise their daughter in a home filled with love and stability. But those closest to her noticed the subtle signs: his distant behavior, the frustration in his voice when he thought no one was listening. And then there was the gender reveal. Jasmine had been ecstatic to learn she was having a baby girl. It was everything she had hoped for. But for Kayshaun, it wasn't the news he wanted. He had envisioned a son, someone to carry on his name, to mold in his own image. When the reality set in that he would be the father of a daughter, something inside him changed. The excitement he once expressed began to fade. He became withdrawn, less involved in the preparations, and short-tempered when Jasmine spoke about their future. She noticed, but she kept moving forward, hoping it was just a phase, that he would come around once he held the baby in his arms. But as the weeks went by, the distance between them grew. Jasmine confided in a close friend that she felt like she was doing this alone, that the man she had promised to spend her life with wasn't the same person anymore. What she didn't realize was that his silence wasn't just detachment. It was something much darker. And before anyone could fully understand what was happening, it was too late. Jasmine and Kayshaun's story began like many others, a chance encounter that quickly turned into something deeper. They met through mutual friends in Greenville, North Carolina. Jasmine was drawn to his confidence, his way of making her feel like the most important person in the room. He had a charm that was hard to ignore, and for a while, it felt like she had found someone who truly understood her. Their relationship moved quickly. Within months, they were inseparable, spending late nights talking about the future, about dreams they hoped to chase together. Jasmine, always the planner, envisioned a stable home, a family built on love and trust. Kayshaun spoke about wanting the same things, about building a life with her. But even in those early days, there were moments, subtle but telling, where his temper surfaced, where his need for control became clear. Despite the occasional arguments, Jasmine believed in their love. She saw the best in him, convinced that whatever rough edges he had would smooth out over time. And when she found out she was pregnant, she was certain this was the moment that would bring them even closer. At first, Kayshaun seemed just as excited. He talked about baby names, about the kind of father he wanted to be. He held her belly, listening for kicks, telling her he couldn't wait to meet their child. Jasmine clung to these moments, believing they were proof that they were on the right path. Then came the gender reveal. It was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone in their journey. Jasmine had always dreamed of having a little girl, someone she could raise to be strong, kind, and independent. But the second the confetti burst into shades of pink, the energy shifted. Kayshaun forced a smile, but those closest to them noticed the difference. His words of excitement felt hollow, his body language tense. Later that night, when it was just the two of them, Jasmine brought it up. He brushed it off at first, saying he had just been hoping for a boy, that it wasn't a big deal. But as the days went on, the distance between them grew. Jasmine tried to ignore it. She focused on preparing for their daughter's arrival, decorating the nursery, buying tiny outfits, and making lists of names. She wanted this to be a joyful time, a moment of unity. But Kayshaun withdrew more and more, his responses short, his presence fading. She confided in her best friend, admitting that things didn't feel right. He doesn't talk about her, she said one evening. Like, he knows she's coming, but he doesn't seem happy about it. The arguments became more frequent. Small disagreements turned into full-blown fights, often ending with Kayshaun leaving the apartment for hours, sometimes overnight. Jasmine was exhausted. She was carrying the weight of the pregnancy, both physically and emotionally, while also trying to hold together a relationship that felt like it was slipping through her fingers. But despite everything, she still held on to hope. She told herself that once their daughter was born, things would change, that Kayshaun would see her, hold her, and everything would fall into place. What she didn't realize was that in his mind, the future had already taken a different shape. And instead of preparing for life as a father, he was preparing for something else, something unthinkable. The days leading up to July 15th, 2023, passed in a blur for Jasmine. At 38 weeks pregnant, she was exhausted but determined. She had spent the past few weeks making sure everything was ready for her daughter's arrival, folding tiny clothes, arranging baby bottles, double-checking her hospital bag. But beneath her excitement, there was something else, something she hadn't spoken about in full detail. Those closest to her sensed it. She wasn't sleeping well. Her texts were shorter, her responses delayed. There were moments when she seemed distant, lost in thought, as if carrying a weight far heavier than pregnancy alone. That morning, the air inside Jasmine's apartment was eerily still. No signs of struggle were immediately visible, nothing that suggested the horror that had unfolded just hours earlier. When deputies arrived, the silence was deafening. Then they found her. Jasmine was lying there unmoving. At first glance, it wasn't clear what had happened. There were no immediate gunshots, no pools of blood. But something was very, very wrong. Paramedics were called. Time was slipping away, but they worked quickly, transporting Jasmine to ECU Health Medical Center. Despite their efforts, there was nothing they could do. Jasmine was gone, and so was her unborn daughter. As the news spread, the shock was immediate. A healthy young woman, just days away from bringing a new life into the world, had died under circumstances that no one could comprehend. Family and friends were devastated, but grief quickly turned to questions. How could this have happened? What had gone so terribly wrong? Then came the autopsy. The truth it revealed was undeniable. Jasmine hadn't died from natural causes, nor had it been a tragic medical complication. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and strangulation. Someone had killed her. Someone had taken her life, and in doing so, had also taken the life of the child she had carried for nearly 9 months. The moment the medical examiner confirmed it as a homicide, everything changed. Jasmine Cooper had not simply been found unresponsive. She had been murdered, and the person responsible was still out there. The moment Jasmine's death was ruled a homicide, law enforcement shifted into action. This wasn't just a tragic loss. It was now a murder investigation. Detectives began piecing together the final hours of Jasmine's life, searching for anything that could explain who had done this and why. They interviewed family members, close friends, and neighbors. They combed through phone records, surveillance footage, and Jasmine's recent messages. Every detail mattered now, and the closer they looked, the more one name kept coming up: Kayshaun Williams. In the hours following Jasmine's death, Kayshaun made a public post on Facebook that sent shockwaves through those who knew him. Instead of remaining silent or cooperating with authorities, He poured his emotions into a lengthy, almost frantic message. He spoke of heartbreak, of devastation beyond words. He called Jasmine and their unborn daughter his world. He said he couldn't believe what had happened, that his mind was shattered, that maybe he should just take his own life. At first glance, the post seemed like the words of a grieving fiancé, a man in complete despair over an unthinkable loss. But for investigators, something about it didn't sit right. The language was off, too focused on his own suffering, too performative. And then there was the timing. He had taken to social media before speaking to law enforcement, before showing up at the hospital, before doing anything that a heartbroken father-to-be would be expected to do. It wasn't just a display of grief. It felt like a performance. As detectives dug deeper, the pieces started to fall into place. Witnesses had reported that Kayshaun had been acting distant in the weeks leading up to Jasmine's death, especially after finding out the baby was a girl. Arguments had intensified. He had been seen coming and going from Jasmine's apartment at odd hours. And then there was the physical evidence, details that authorities have yet to publicly release, but were enough to make them certain. On July 16, 2023, just one day after Jasmine was found, law enforcement moved in. They tracked Kayshaun to a home on Eagle Chase Lane. But he wasn't going to come quietly. What should have been a straightforward arrest turned into a tense standoff. For a brief moment, it seemed like he was considering making good on his Facebook post, the one where he hinted at taking his own life. Officers surrounded the home, their voices firm but steady, urging him to surrender. Then finally, after what felt like hours, it was over. Kayshaun Williams was taken into custody. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, one for Jasmine, one for the unborn daughter he had once claimed to love. He was transported to the Pitt County Jail, where he would await trial, held without bond. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Jasmine's loved ones had suspected the truth, but now it was official. The man who had once promised to build a life with her, the man who had spoken of love and family, had allegedly taken everything from her in the most brutal way possible. But even with him behind bars, the questions remained. Why had he done it? What had pushed him to the point of no return? And perhaps the hardest question of all, had Jasmine seen it coming? Had she known in those final moments that the person she once trusted had turned into her greatest threat? News of Jasmine Cooper's murder spread quickly, shaking the Greenville community to its core. People who had never met her found themselves grieving alongside those who had. Vigils were held, candles lit in her memory, and social media flooded with messages demanding justice. Her name became more than just a headline. It became a rallying cry against domestic violence. The shock deepened as more details surfaced. How had this happened to someone so full of life, someone who had been days away from becoming a mother? Friends and family spoke out, some expressing guilt for not seeing the warning signs sooner. Others pointed to the conversations Jasmine had in her final weeks, moments where she hinted at trouble but never fully voiced her fears. As the case gained traction, it reignited discussions about domestic violence, especially in relationships where control and unspoken resentment fester beneath the surface. Experts weighed in, emphasizing the importance of recognizing the subtle signs, the isolation, the sudden shifts in behavior, the quiet warnings often overlooked until it's too late. For many, Jasmine's story was a wake-up call. It was a stark reminder that danger doesn't always come from strangers. It can come from the very person who once claimed to love you. Following the arrest of Kayshaun Williams, the legal process commenced with a series of procedural steps. Williams was formally charged with 2 counts of murder, reflecting the severity of the crimes against Jasmine Cooper and their unborn daughter. Williams was detained at the Pitt County Jail without the possibility of bond, underscoring the gravity of the charges and the perceived risk he posed to the community. As the case progressed, pretrial hearings were held to address various legal matters, including the admissibility of evidence and the scheduling of the trial. The defense and prosecution prepared their arguments, with the defense potentially exploring mitigating factors such as Williams' mental state or personal history, while the prosecution aimed to present a compelling case for conviction based on the evidence gathered. The potential legal outcomes for Williams are stark. If convicted of both counts of murder, he could face life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. reflecting the profound loss of both Jasmine and her unborn child. The case has also sparked discussions about the broader implications of domestic violence and the legal system's role in protecting vulnerable individuals. As of now, Williams remains in custody, awaiting the commencement of his trial. The community watches closely, seeking justice for Jasmine and her unborn daughter, hoping that the legal proceedings will bring some measure of closure to this tragic chapter. This case raises difficult but necessary questions. How do unmet expectations in relationships escalate to such devastating violence? Could warning signs have been recognized sooner? And more importantly, what can be done to prevent tragedies like this from happening again? Domestic violence isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's hidden behind closed doors in silent tensions, in small but telling changes in behavior. As a community, how can we do better? How can we support those who may be trapped in dangerous situations before it's too late? Your thoughts matter. Share your opinions in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever experienced a situation where warning signs were ignored or overlooked? What do you think could be done to improve awareness and prevention? If you found this discussion meaningful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more cases like this. Every voice in these conversations brings us one step closer to understanding and hopefully preventing future tragedies.